And we have Clea Moore. Clea is the principal product manager with Yahoo. And I got a bit of a sneak peek on some of the stuff I think they're going to be covering today. Yahoo is doing some very amazing things that brands should be capitalizing on when it comes to dealing with consumers and the consumer experience. And there's some really great things. If you are out there and you are interested in making your consumer experience better, you want to listen to this session and take lots of notes. So over to you, and I'm going to just go and hide for the next 30 minutes, and I'll be back right at the end for Q&A.
All right. Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate that. And hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in at this very last session of the Canadian Email Summit. It's been a great week, I think, or a great couple of days, I guess you could say. This session here is all about optimizing the inbox experience and how to boost your engagement. And I think usually when it comes to Yahoo, you folks are pretty used to kind of seeing Marcel Becker up here. Well, today I'm incredibly excited to be sitting down with Clea Moore, who is the principal product manager for Yahoo. And we really want to chat about the importance of email engagement from the mailbox provider perspective, which is one we don't get to hear often enough on the centered side, I think. But we're also going to be trying to learn a little bit more about what mailbox providers like Yahoo and others are doing to improve the inbox experience for consumers. And we're not only talking about making the inbox a safe place to hang out, we're actually talking about making it an awesome one, which I think is the next level, right? Yahoo really has been very focused on improving that consumer experience. As Matt mentioned, I think they've been doing this honestly for several years at this point. And they've been investing in a couple of new technologies that really support that connection between brands that are sending the emails and the recipients, the subscribers, hopefully, that are receiving those emails, which is an important aspect that sometimes we forget about a little bit. Because after all, that recipient engagement is just about the closest thing to a growth hack that you're going to get when it comes to email. So we love engagement. This session is really meant to be kind of a bit of a fireside chat, a virtual one at that. So while we do have some topics in mind, please do feel free to kind of add some questions or comments into the chat. I'm going to, I guess, like attempt to kind of answer those live as we're going. Really, our goal is to just help you get something out of this time that's together. So really bring it on, right? If you have any questions, if we're not answering what you want to hear about yet, really help us get that going, okay? All right, so let's dig in, shall we, Clea? I think you've been with Yahoo for what, about 6 months now?
Just about.
Yeah, right. And it's funny, I remember when that job posting came out and I was just immediately excited about it because it's kind of like yet another signal from Yahoo that you're really looking to like work with senders, not against us, and kind of just make it harder for us to hit the inbox. It really is meant to be kind of a partnership, a teamwork thing here. But I know you've typically kind of been working in email on the centered side, really for what, like 11 plus years at this point. So I'd love to really kind of know a little bit more about what's going on at Yahoo, why they've decided to hire one of us senders to join their ranks. And I guess what are you folks cooking up over there at Yahoo that's going to make the future of email a little bit more awesome?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so super happy to be here with you. And exactly right. I saw the same posting and had worked with Marcel in collaboration on the sender side, most recently at Oracle on their deliverability consulting team. And, just seemed like, wow, what a great opportunity. I think he's done such a great job in this space of evangelizing the need to sort of bridge the gap between mailbox providers and senders. And Lily, for those of you who know her, I mean, there's really a great group of people over here that have been working on this for a while. And this is really just a signal that they're doubling down on that. So yeah, so I'm here to help enable that, to help, bring that sender perspective into our consumer offerings and to build tools and documentation and enable basically that brand to consumer experience. So that really, I mean, there's a few technologies, right, that we'll talk about, I think, that are kind of associated with that, but really they're investing heavily they understand the value in connecting the senders to the brands. And so I am here to kind of build that out on our side. And I think to just kind of level set first with, there's still this overarching theme for all mailbox providers, not just Yahoo, that fighting spam is still number one, right? 98% or something like that of the messages we receive are spam. So we're talking about like a 2%, and out of that 2% of legitimate mail, the vast majority of it, I think 96%, is actually from businesses, right? So other than one-to-one communications. So that is what's powering that consumer experience in our UIs and our mailboxes, right? So especially on the Yahoo side, we understand that consumers want this information to be readily available and be delightful and more accessible. And so that's really what we're invested in. And we recognize that partnering with businesses, with senders, is an important part of that overall picture.
That makes so much sense. Yeah, I feel like it's really cool to hear you say all that, because I think it's like, we're talking about engagement. We're talking about how to just make email more awesome, right? Like, I think that's really the focus of this session here. And so I guess, what is engagement within the scope of email? And I think this is really cool. I want to hear this from the mailbox provider side, because I think that's really just something I hear often.
Yeah. And I think that's a great way to frame it, because, I think there are kind of two ways to look at it. Certainly from the ISP side, right, there's negative and positive engagement. So there's people complaining, there's people unsubscribing, but there's also people opening and clicking and reading. There's sort of metrics on both sides. But I think what we're talking about today is really, as a sender, how are you increasing opens or clicks or conversions? It's the things that, are driving you and your business. Because at the end of the day, really, we have that mutual customer of the consumer. And when you're doing well, they're enjoying the experience. That benefits us. It's like it's a big sort of ecosystem experience.
Yeah, that, and honestly, my deliverability bones are just like dancing over here, because I feel like it's good not only for that consumer experience and like building the loyalty with brand, just getting used to that kind of like that communication that you can have with people, but it's also about hitting the inbox. Like, you can't do any of that stuff if you're not hitting the inbox. I mean, these two things just go so well together. And I think that's where, like, if you want to just get creative within the tools that are available within your own ESP or whatever mailing platform you're using, that's great. But there are some really awesome technologies that also can kind of give you that leg up, right? In addition to helping you stand out in the inbox, which is just becoming so increasingly hard as we move into this like crowded world that we're living in, right? So yeah, I guess, are there certain ways, I'm going to share some slides soon. We're going to call those like a virtual fireside log, maybe perhaps to add to our fire. But yeah, I'm curious, like, from a high level, I mean, what are the best ways to kind of like boost engagement? Like, how do people get creative with this? Like, even if they're not using technologies?
Yeah. I think, it's just the continuation, right, of what we kind of talked about, right? It's all about getting people to react favorably to your mail as often as possible while limiting that negative impact, right? So making sure that you're segmenting properly, that you are, ensuring you are sending to people who are interested in and want to receive these messages. I'm sure we all hear that all the time. But it's so important, right? It's so important. And so we recognize there are ways to help you with that, right? So I think that there's sort of like, in future states that I envision, some more support around things like that, like signals, even with this privacy conscious sort of frame that we have now in email, right? We're losing a lot of those signals. We're losing, that open pixel in a lot of cases. So trying to support with other signals that are still privacy conscious, but allow you to have some picture of, what your campaigns are looking like, what your overall program is looking like. Those are all important metrics to be tracking, of course. And then you have multi-channel, experiences to layer on top of that. So it's more and more important, I think, to have a good pulse on those things.
I think that makes a ton of sense. Yeah. And I guess just senders, if you're listening, there was a reason that we sort of asked that question in two different ways, which is I wanted Clea to say the positive interactions matter, but also the negative reactions from recipients matter, because it really does need to be both sides of that coin. Otherwise, you're just kind of setting them up to just mark you as spam, which is super devastating for not only your inbox placement, but actually just that brand connection that you're trying to make. Like, what is going to be worse for that than having people incited to the point of wanting to mark your mail as spam? Like, that's never going to be a good mix, right? So,
right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Something to keep in mind there. Cool. All right. So let's share some screens here. If I am able to do it, folks, bear with me. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see that we've got some questions for Clea. Woohoo! Okay, cool. So jumping to the first one here, and I want this to be a chance for you all to kind of just get to better understand what this looks like within a recipient's inbox, which is why we're sharing screens right now. We will drop these once you kind of get the gist of what we're talking about here. So I guess, Clea, do you want to just kind of walk them through a couple of these technologies?
Yeah. So just wanted to have kind of like a visual to follow along in this part of the discussion. I like the virtual log to the fire sort of comment. That makes a lot of sense, right? So the first framework that we support, and it's not just us, right? You can see there are other major providers that support this framework as well. That's kind of what I wanted to use as the lens for the things that we're talking about today, because we recognize we're a small portion of your file, right? There are other providers out there. So where's the most bang for your buck, essentially? What are the frameworks you should be looking at that have a big impact across your entire audience? This is really one of those. And so accelerated mobile pages, what is it, right? It's basically allowing you to create an app-like experience within the message itself. So users can interact with it, they can come back to it, it will refresh itself based on their specific interactions. It's not quite the same as like a dynamic content where you're switching it up and you have it triggered on the open. It's really to do with the user's interaction as if they were on like a microsite in email. And there's all kinds of cool use cases for it. So this is a nice sort of sample that Dave Stiss over at Aweber put together in terms of Etsy, right? So e-commerce is definitely a no-brainer here, of course, but things like travel booking or surveys that are interactive or event registrations. We've worked with providers that have seen some really dramatic boosts in engagement because you're keeping that experience right there in the email itself, right? There's the less friction of having them directed to a different site. They're there in the email. That benefits us, of course, as well, because we want to keep the interaction within our platform. And it benefits you because you're getting that sort of reduced friction, right? Improving the bottom of the funnel in terms of, increased engagement and conversions with people interacting directly with the messages. So in terms of who supports that, Gmail, Yahoo, Mail.ru on the provider side. And then in terms of sort of requirements and what it looks like to get into it, there is, in some cases, an additional hurdle of basically it requires this third MIME type part of the message. So that can be a hurdle for some platforms that don't currently have that built in, right? There are several out there. These resources will kind of direct you to who those are, right? So there's an AMP specific site that I've included here that includes everything to do with AMP. There's a playground where you can play around with the code and things like that. But so there's lots of resources out there. We even have a little page ourselves about this stuff on our Sender Hub. But there is sort of that, right? That first step is, we need to make sure that we have the components in place in our email framework to be able to support this. Once you have that in place, or you're working with a provider who has that in place, then there's all kinds of great resources in terms of these playgrounds where you can play, as I mentioned, with the code and test, right, with all this stuff to see kind of what the best use case is, what the best sort of model is for each campaign. There's lots of templates out there even that you can leverage, this being one of them. So there's more and more resources around this. And again, at Gmail plus Yahoo, at least for B2C audiences, right? If we're talking about North America, that's a pretty sizable chunk of your file. So being able to boost engagement, we've seen, like, for example, 4x increasing in registrations for events, 3x like click-throughs on a new product launch, things like that. So pretty big impact on a pretty big sizable portion of your file.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is Bimmy.
Cool. All right. Yeah. So Bimmy, and this is brand images for message identification, bit of a mouthful, but this is a great framework, right, for basically enabling brands to control their logo, that sort of brand impression, and not just the inbox, honestly, at least on the Yahoo side, it's leveraged all across the Yahoo ecosystem. Gmail, Apple recently announced support for this, right? This has been a big thing in the announcements recently. So we're super excited they're finally on board. And have been talking to them about that, right? So this is something that is helping users because it's giving some sort of recognition to a trusted brand. And it's helping us in terms of the UI and visual experience within the platform to be able to show these logos associated with the sender. It looks nice. And then for you, it's controlling that experience across these different platforms. And that's again, a sizable chunk of the audience. In terms of implementation or sort of requirements around this, there are some catches, right? So Yahoo, we were the first to support it. We wanted to drive adoption. So we did not move forward with what's called a verified mark certificate. So the whole idea of BIMI is to encourage, brands to authenticate their mail. So there's kind of a couple components. The verified mark certificate is basically saying, right, this logo that I'm putting into email is trademarked, right? And we have a certificate to prove that it is trademarked. And that is a surprisingly high bar to meet, even for large brands. I discovered at Oracle.
I discovered as well, yes.
I know your pain. And so on the Yahoo side of things, we just want that adoption to be out there. So we do some of our own checking on our end, right? So you basically, the initial hoops are this DMARC and enforcement policy. Yeah. So having a DMARC policy in place, having an enforcement policy on that, that can be on your subdomain for sending, ideally your top level domain across the board, right? We want you to be authenticating everything. And that it will allow you, basically, if you put that record into your DNS saying like, here's my BIMI record with the DMARC and the image that I'd like you to display, we'll pick that up and we will display it on our end after some checks. If you are looking to implement at Google and Apple, they require currently a verified mark certificate. So that trademarking of your brand logo, that is a complicated process and sometimes a costly one. So, we recognize that that's a very high bar, even again for big brands, but not to mention, some of the smaller mom and pops that would like to implement this stuff. So that's certainly something that we've been discussing as a mailbox provider, sort of email client provider, community around what could we do to make this more accessible while taking the VMC signal and boosting that further, right? Like, you've gone through this verification process, let's boost that. So Apple has done that with that, like, this sender is verified sort of in the header, right? They add some additional notification that tells the user you can trust this mail. So I see probably this evolving, right, as we are trying to continue to increase adoption, but certainly something that already, if you're able to meet, those requirements, is highly impactful, and you absolutely should be doing it as a brand.
For sure, yeah, and I think it's really cool that Yahoo doesn't require it for now. I mean, obviously, you folks are confident in the fact that it's strong enough as is with the current kind of framework you have in place to be able to continue to provide confidence to your recipients to know that it's a valid mark, right? That the BIMI logo that you're seeing is actually from the real brand. So I think it's, it's great there, but it's like, I love the fact that you could do then maybe like a proof of concept for your leadership team, or you could kind of put together something to say, well, we tried it with Yahoo. I get it. Gmail is the biggest part of our audience, but look, it works at Yahoo, and the bar is lower for you to kind of enter into BIMI, I guess. So one thing just with the VMCs, there is cost, there is time involved. Oftentimes you'll hear the steps being kind of like, get yourself, set up with DMARC, get everything going, and then get your logo going. I would suggest doing those in tandem, because sometimes, depending on especially which country you're in, there could be a several month wait. I think our person actually maybe quoted like up to 18 months of waiting for the trademark to come through. And it's like, there's beautiful things you can do where, imagine you could have seasonal logos, or you could do really neat things, but you need to have a trademark in place if you're looking to kind of make that work with Apple, with Google, with places like that. So if you're looking to test, Yahoo is where you want to look, right? Okay,
exactly.
Cool. All right, well, let's move on to the third one, which is schema, structured data.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So in terms of schema, right, what is that? What's maybe a term you have or haven't heard of, structured data. So it's basically a framework that is supported, again, by multiple providers. I think Gmail calls it, they have their own flavor of it. Sometimes it's called markup, sometimes it's called annotations. It sort of shifts, right, how they support it and what it's called. But they were one of the first to kind of roll out support for this. They are very gung ho about this. And we've seen some evolution recently in how they're treating that code. But what it does essentially is it allows you to input basically certain tags, right, in the code of a message that says, right, here is my deal, here is an image related to this deal, here's the destination. I would like you to write the URL destination after they click this image, or here's the expiration date for this deal. We each have our own way of sort of treating, right, this code, but we all surface and leverage it. So Microsoft, this is one of the few things that they're also on board with. They also leverage this. They have their own sort of shopping right at the top of messages. We've got this same treatment here. This is just one place that we leverage it in Yahoo. It's actually a number of places across our ecosystem that we pull this in. We have a shopping view for users that leverages this code. We have this top of message treatment that is basically pulling in information from other messages that this specific user has received from this sender with little snippets like, here's the coupon, or here's like the discount, right? And here's when it expires. It's also things like package tracking, store pickup information. You might see pop-ups in the UIs, right, in the mailbox provider side. Certainly Gmail does that. We do that, travel itineraries. So there's definitely several use cases there as well. This does not require, there are no hoops to jump through necessarily to use this, which is a benefit, right? So it's sort of a low barrier to entry. You really just need to test inputting these code pieces basically into your message build. And there's a lot of resources around there. So there's even some additional sort of playgrounds, I think, that other, right, in terms of the how to use it, how to leverage it. Google has a good sort of developer site. We've got some support on our site and the Sender Hub for that as well. I've included that supporting information so you can see it, but there's a lot of sort of upside here, right? Because what it's doing is it's allowing you to increase your exposure. So maybe you send one email message with like this deal or whatever it is, but now it's surfacing in all these different places, right? We're pulling it again into another message at the top. We are surfacing it in our shopping view. We are, pulling it into all these other places. So it gives new life to the content that you spend a lot of time creating. And there's no cost to do it. It's really, it's a free sort of framework that you can leverage. So this is a pretty impactful one.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And we've got a lot of creative email nerds that are probably tuning in right now. So it's like one of those, like, you folks, you're going to go play with this on the weekend, or you're going to do it when you've got like 1 free hour in your day or something, but like use it, not only just get you comfortable with it and see if it's for you, but also if you're trying to make a case to like your leadership team to say like, let's try this thing. And they're like, I don't get it. Just kind of go build it and show them what it could look like. And that's a really easy way to get them to just kind of lean forward and be like, wow, that's amazing. And then all of a sudden you get a little bit of leeway to go do some testing. So keep that in mind. Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. So I'm going to stop sharing slides. That was officially the last virtual log. The fire is now burning down. Oh no. Okay. So, all right. So we talked about level of effort. So I think we're kind of good there, but I guess, like what's the best way, do you think, to assess like the value that you might get from some of these features, and then like almost determine the priority level within your own organization? Obviously you can't kind of just choose all 3 and run with them, perhaps, unless you've got a really big org. So like, what's your recommendation there?
Yeah, definitely. So it's a great follow-up question to sort of that last slide, which is right. That one doesn't have a cost associated with it. It's relatively easy to get started with. So Schema, I would certainly recommend. But when you're thinking about it, right, it depends on who you are as a sender, who's your audience, what are you trying to optimize for, what type of mail are you sending, right? So e-commerce and you have support in place for AMP, that might be a hugely impactful one for you, right? So I think it sort of depends on who you are. BIMI is one that is certainly a little bit tougher to tie, I think, ROI attribution to. That's always a big thing, right? On the sending side is like, well, what's the boost? Well, great, brand impressions is kind of vague. But maybe testing that with Yahoo to see, like, did we actually get any additional engagement from having this in place, right? Or is it just about that brand experience that it is sort of intangible, but it's important and we know that. So that might be one that you put lower down on the list, but certainly still now with Apple on board, right? That's the other thing, is adoption is growing for these things. So in terms of your audience, looking at sort of what share of your audience that might impact is a big one as well.
All right, right on. I like it. Okay, so we've got a question in the Q&A from Tara, of all people. Hello, Tara. So her question is about BIMI, and her question is, has Yahoo ever considered outsourcing the certification to email service providers of smaller businesses? So figure this is where the ESP would have to do the manual footwork to verify the logo for those mom and pop shops.
Yeah, that's certainly something that I think has been considered, right? That we have trusted partnerships with some senders. So is that right? A case where we could create this partnership to say the onus is on you now. We are putting our trust in you. That's a bit of a tough sell on the privacy side on our end, and sort of user protection side of things, because it's taking like our platform and what we're saying we will do for our users and putting it in someone else's hands. So that I think has been the friction around that, but that's certainly something that makes sense on a conceptual level, and certainly we have those relationships where we know there are platforms we could trust to do the right thing. It's a tough one though.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would point to the BIMI group on that one.
Yeah.
There are definitely things in motion around that. Hopefully more information will come soon. That's about all I can say at this point. So
right. Yeah, we're talking about it. We're thinking about it. The BIMI group, exactly, that we're a part of. We meet about these things. We talk about them. So it's definitely, we understand that there's friction around it, and we're trying to work to fix that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for joining us today. Wonderful discussion. I love some of the things that Yahoo's doing to really give back to consumers and really drive engagement, and the tools being offered to brands that you're just not seeing elsewhere. And even where you are seeing some of that duplication, like schema and AMP and things like that, just how Yahoo is making that so front and center and so much more user friendly for consumers. I think it's fantastic in regards to the outreach as well, being one of the most accessible mailbox providers to talk to about anything. So kudos to the team for that. And a long history of that as well, like almost a 20-year history working with various team members through the Yahoo and AOL groups. And, it's been very consistent over that time period. So thank you very much for joining us and your time today. I'm